This is a study session for the Prescott City Council. Today is Tuesday, January 11th, and we will be discussing water policy. So please start with roll call.
Mayor Good,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Rusing,
Here.
Councilman Montoya,
Here.
Councilman Sishka,
Here.
Councilman Tenney,
Yes.
and I know that Councilwoman Halls, here she comes. And Councilman Moore is excused.
All right, this study session is going to be a presentation of the draft 2022 updated water policy. So I will turn it over to Gwen Rowich to explain what we're going to be seeing today.
Start.
Yeah, Mayor, if you'd bear with me for just a moment, it might be good to explain to the audience how we got to this point. Do you think there's value to that?
A good lead in.
So, post the last election, the mayor came to staff and said, there's some policy changes I'd like to see us explore regarding the water policy that at the time was approved in 2019.
2019.
And in the interest of expediting the process, staff and the mayor have been meeting for the better part of 2-3 months.
3 months.
Just kind of trying to massage some of the areas in the water policy that he felt passionately needed to be reviewed and potentially changed. And this is kind of the public unveiling. We sent out draft copies and posted them on the website end of last week.
Friday, Saturday.
Right. And the idea being that there'll be multiple meetings of the council as a whole to discuss the policy in its draft form and continue to massage it and change it where appropriate to meet the requirements and demands and expectations of this new council. The reason, as I said a couple 3 minutes ago, is in the interest of time, instead of waiting until everybody was seated and everybody could be brought up to speed, we took it upon ourselves collectively with the mayor's blessings and assistance to start looking at things that seem to have a lot of momentum with the folks that have been elected already. Just thought it might be good to give that context, Mayor, at this point. So,
Thank you, Michael. And I will emphasize the fact that I've been advocating for a more rational water policy than had been adopted by the previous council in 2019. And clearly this was a policy that resonated with the residents and the voters in the last election here. So being able to incorporate a more functional water policy with the challenges that we're seeing in growth and development, I think is really essential, not only now, but in the future as we move forward with not only our assured water supply designation, our decision and order, but also be able to have the public be exposed to this original draft, try to be as transparent as possible as we can, solicit the public's input as they look at this draft policy. We're going to ask for their review and comments, and those ones that we find substantial and beneficial will likely be incorporated in a final draft. So this is a process, and this is the first step that we're taking to have the public have a chance to take a look at what we've developed so far. And once we get it into a well-crafted form, then it'll probably be brought back in the next probably month to 2 months and have it voted on and adopted.
and to dovetail with the mayor's comments, what Gwen's responsibility is going to be is to bring forward the recommendations of the working group, which included representation from the Public Works Department, the Community Development Department, the Fire Department,
Legal department.
the Legal Department. Am I forgetting any department? The manager's office and the mayor. And we didn't want anybody to think that this is inning 7, 8, or 9. This is very early in the baseball game. I like to use sports analogies.
Councilwoman Hall, did you have a comment before we start the review?
Well, I just have a question. So how does this review, is this what our current policy is and we're making changes off of this? Is this something entirely new that was drafted? What is it? What are we looking at? And
Gwen's going to show you, I would assume, the compare and
Part of the
contrast.
presentation.
Is that
So
no?
the current policy is on the website.
Okay.
It consists of 3 pages. It basically says that we use the water resource management model as our guide. It does outline the process for an applicant to apply for water, but that's about the
You could bring that 3-page
extent of it. I'm actually
policy
going to
up.
bring up the website here. Let me just do that right now.
and
I
then-
can show you.
So, for all intents and purposes, you are doing a compare and contrast because you will have what the existing policy is versus what.
The majority of the existing policy is emulated in the proposed policy.
Oh, okay. So it's basically
We're not
changes
excluding anything. We're actually adding to it and making the new policy more robust.
Oh, okay.
It's
and then
it's a ratcheting up of some of the regulations, or it's the potential ratcheting up of some of the regulations
okay.
based on the decisions of the council.
And then so it's basically study session, and then we would go to a voting session based on the changes, or we are making. I'm just trying to understand the process.
Could be multiple study sessions. In fact, I would have the expectation, in the interest of transparency and this council's desire to let the public vet things, I would be surprised if it's not multiple.
Yeah, there probably is very likely to be multiple study sessions as we incorporate suggestions coming in from the public and concerned stakeholders, so that we can refine it to a final form that we can actually vote on and adopt.
Oh, okay. So it'd be one final revision to it, or one final water policy adoption. There won't be things that'll be implemented or voted on
They will be
during the
voted on.
process. Well, but once it's final, we're basically going to come to a consensus after multiple study sessions and then agree on adopting one new water policy.
That would be the general description of the policy, of the process.
There are 2 or
great.
3
Thank you.
things that we're going to recommend you guys look at that tweak, that kind of transcend the water policy, and I think Gwen will get into those. One of those is in instances where there's dust abatement, the preferred position for staff and for the mayor is that reclaimed water is used instead of potable drinking water. That's not actually part of the water policy. That is a standalone provision in the general.
It will be in city code.
It'll be in city code. So there are a couple, 3 instances like that that are water related that won't be part of the water policy. But we thought we'd bring those forward at the same time because they're so connected to water conservation and water consumption.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. They're more just process questions. I know we've got a lot of newbies on council,
Councilman,
obviously myself
Montoya, you had a
included.
question?
Yeah, Gwen, I'm just asking from kind of to get a little bit deeper on the vein that Councilwoman Hall was talking about. Is Water Issues Subcommittee part of this process too in the way that you guys envision it, or is it a standalone process with just the council?
I don't think we have a set in stone. I'm going to speak for Gwen. It saves her having to, Yeah, Gwen, yeah.
I'm done.
You're done, Gwen. It's all
Don't worry
good.
about this.
We're going to, so no, some of it's protectionism, but in any case, not from Brandon, just in general, that if the desire is for this to be vetted through the Water Issue Subcommittee, I think that's a decision made at this dais. If it's something that you guys as a collective feel like, okay, we feel pretty good about where we're headed, why don't we go directly to public comment and then a vote by this council? That it's completely your discretion.
And then just on that same kind of vein again, there is going to be a mayor's ad hoc committee that's going to also be involved in this policy review.
Yeah, I would defer to the mayor about how that looks.
I would consider that more likely to be a post-adoption review and advisory committee that will monitor the effectiveness of this new policy once it's voted in and enacted.
Clear to me. Thank you.
Councilman Shishka.
Thank you, Mayor. All I'm going to say is if you are a stakeholder or a possible stakeholder, you think you might be a stakeholder, and you don't speak up, then shame on you. You're going to get what you get. So understand that you have every right to come up here, and whether you're for it or against it, to give us your input. And if you don't, shame on you.
Thank you, Councilman. Let's proceed.
Back to Gwen.
Back to Gwen.
All right.
Thanks.
Well, good afternoon. Water policy is a big topic, and we have a fairly lengthy presentation, so I'll try to move it along as best I can, but please ask me questions if you have questions as we move along, or make comments so that we can take those all in as part of the public comment as well. I just wanted to kick this off for those who are watching at home or who may watch this later, to let you know that on the city's webpage, this is the city's homepage when you first log into prescott-az.gov, right here is a tile labeled the 2022 Draft Water Management Policy. And if you click on that tile, it will take you to this box. And in this box is the latest version of the policy that we're going to be reviewing today. And there's also an amendment to Prescott City Code 2-1-8. That's something that Michael was alluding to earlier. There will be some amendments to City Code once the policy is adopted in order to codify some of those things that need to be in City Code. Below that is the current water policy. So anyone that wants to review the current policy, that's right here underneath the top of the page, water policy. The very first document is the city's current water policy that was adopted in November of 2019. Also within this text, it says, please deadline to submit written comments is February 7th. The city will continue to take comments after February 7th, but we will be compiling our first set of comments on February the 7th. You click on this here, that's highlighted in red, and it will take you to an information page where you can submit your questions, comments, review, however you would like to do that. So I just wanted to put that out there first for those that may not stay with us through the entire presentation. This is how you can participate in this process, this very public process. All right. On to the good stuff. So as the mayor mentioned, this is a draft. This is our first draft for our 2022 water management policy. And I will say that historically, the city has updated the policy or adopted water policy on an annual or semi-annual basis, depending on the pleasure of that particular council. And so we would anticipate some direction from the council on that as well. So I'm not putting the actual policy up here. I'm just going to give you the synopsis of what's in the policy. It's essentially broken up into two parts, which is informational piece in the beginning as far as state laws, city laws, what infrastructure we have, things of that nature. And then the second part of the policy are 24 specific policy statements that have been brought forward through the staff and mayor and council. So the city of Prescott is located in what's called the Prescott Active Management Area. There are 5 active management areas in the state of Arizona that were established under the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. The Prescott AMA is comprised of the city of Prescott, Prescott Valley, Chino Valley, Dewey Humboldt, Yavapai Prescott Indian Tribe Reservation, and approximately 65% of the AMA is unincorporated Yavapai County. The purpose of the AMA is to place an emphasis on conservation so that communities can replace groundwater use with renewable supplies. So renewable supplies are stormwater that we capture in our lakes and reservoirs, as well as effluent that we recapture after water is used and turns into wastewater. The other important thing about the AMA is that in 1980, they had a goal of safe yield in all 5 AMAs by the year 2025, and that year is fast approaching. So within the policy, water management is how we implement the city's policies, your goals, and objectives in order to meet the state conservation requirements. We do that in a variety of ways through public education. We go out to public events, we have booths, we walk around, we speak with people, we're invited to events, we're invited to speak to special interest groups, things of that nature. The city also has implemented tiered water rates. Over the years, those rates have increased over time. That's been one of the biggest, had one of the biggest effects on water conservation, are water rates. We also, through conservation, the city has adopted building codes that require conservation measures during the construction of new buildings. And we also have adopted ADWR's low water drought tolerant planting for landscaping here in this area, which also reduces water usage. The city's had an incentive and rebate program since 1992, which incentivizes our customers to replace older fixtures with newer fixtures that use less water. And in return for that, they get a credit on their water bill, so that's the incentive. We also use reclaimed water, or we recharge reclaimed water from Willow and Watson reservoirs. System-wide, the city sees an average return rate of 65%. However, under new building codes, we believe that a rate of 70% is achievable. We also are required to meet ADEQ water quality standards and work toward the AMA-wide goal of safe yield.
Hey, Gwen.
Yeah.
That 70% number, is that across Prescott? That's not just the new developments, that's across Prescott.
So the city-wide average is approximately 65%.
Yeah.
But we do believe under the new building code mandates and the low water plantings that we will achieve at least 70% or more in new development areas.
Do you mind if we ask questions while you do the presentation, or would you rather us?
I would welcome as we go.
Okay, wonderful. So in comparison to other cities, where does that 65, 70% number compare? Do we have anything as far as it goes with recharge success, how we're doing? Should we be at 90? Should we be at 50?
So we don't compare ourselves to other communities. We challenge ourselves to do better than we have done in the past.
Okay.
And we meet the state standard for that.
What is the state standard, I guess?
For return rate, it's over 60%.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So the city of Prescott is currently working under its 2009 decision in order of assured water supply. And in the recent months, you have seen presentations on the 2021 modification to the city's decision in order of assured water supply. But this is the decision in order that we're working under today. So that's what will go into the 2022 policy until the 2021 modification has been approved by the state. That could take a minimum of 210 days and potentially longer. Currently, the city has 3 categories of water. The first one is groundwater. That's water that was being used within the Prescott AMA at the time that the AMA was declared out of safe yield in 1998. We also have an alternative category, and within the alternative category, we have direct delivery of effluent to some golf courses and some commercial industrial users in the city. We also have treated effluent supplies for storage and recovery. So that's water that comes out of the treatment plants and goes recharged back into the ground. We have long-term storage credits, and then we have surface water supplies that come from our reservoirs that we capture at Willow and Watson, and we recharge back into the ground. And the third category is the big Chino groundwater. I think it's important to emphasize that at this time, the Big Chino is currently not physically available to us. However, it is in our water portfolio, in our decision in order. And as we move further through the slides, I will explain to you how much water is physically available to us at this time. Are there any questions on this slide? Yes.
Yes, Gwen. I would just like to attach some numbers to these paragraphs here. For example, our assured water supply is currently 16,000 acre feet a year, and that might possibly be changing up or down next year when the state comes out with their new DNO. Is that right?
So that's what I was speaking of here a few minutes ago, that the modification to our decision in order is currently under review. So yes, that number may change as part of the state's review of our application, and we'll know that in about a year.
And then another number to attach is the Big Chino Groundwater. We've already been capped at 9,000 acre feet, about 9,000 acre feet a year if we do build the pipeline, and we share that with Prescott Valley, that 9,000 with Prescott Valley. Isn't it like a 53-47% allocation?
It's 8,067 acre feet. And yes, the city of Prescott is 54% and the town of Prescott Valley is 46%.
Yeah, I was just making those comments so the public understands that, we just can't pump water if it's there, at will, that we do have judgments, adjudications, and it is very well regulated. And even if we do build the pipeline, it's may not be the answer to all of our water problems because it's already been capped to protect the flow of the Verde River by the Salt River Project, right?
Correct.
Oh, thank you.
Gwen, this is great information so far, and I know you have a lot more to go through, so I won't slow you down too much. But you mentioned direct delivery of effluent golf courses. I knew about that, but you also mentioned some industrial users in town. Off the top of your head, can you think of one or two? Give us examples.
Hanson Materials receives. We have a contract with them to deliver effluent to them for reuse.
That's great. That's great that we're making use of it that way instead of our potable city water.
Yes.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. So in terms of physical supplies, we did make some brief mention of the city's infrastructure in the policy, but we also didn't want to inundate the policy with what we physically own. We do have 2 well fields, one in Chino Valley and one in the airport area. The city has excellent water quality. We disinfect with chlorine, and we do have 1 well in Chino and 1 well in the airport that we treat for arsenic. And we treat that with blending as well as some treatment in the airport area. And there's more information on our website, so I put the link to the website within the policy itself if folks want to know more about our operations side of how we deliver water here locally in Prescott. Wastewater is the same. We have a wastewater treatment plant on Sundog, which is located on Prescott Lakes Parkway. And then we have the airport water reclamation facility where we provide direct reuse, and our recharge facility is located at the airport water reclamation facility. We have some excellent videos that some of our staff did in 2021 to explain how we work and operate our water and wastewater system. So anyone that's interested in that, they're actually quite informative. And there's a link here to the wastewater page as well. So how do we integrate laws with state law and other legal obligations as it relates to water? It's important. In 1988, the state of Arizona adopted its Growing Smarter Plus legislation, which essentially integrates water resource availability and future growth. It makes sense that land use and water should go hand in hand. The city's last general plan was adopted in 2015, and it's my understanding that we'll be kicking off the update to the general plan this year. Is that right, George? He's nodding his head yes. So yes, in 2022, we'll be kicking off an update to that. The city also uses its water resource management model, which we've been developing since 2018. It's a long-range planning tool that tracks water demands. There are 3 categories within the WRM: the current, which is what do we pump every day right now; the committed, which are subdivision plats that have been recorded, but maybe all the homes in the lots have not been built yet, so we know those demands are coming; and then projected. That would be our future demands based on underlying zoning within that particular area. We've estimated future projected water uses within those built areas. All of the uses within the WORM are calculated based on utility billing records, and we update that in January of each year. So in terms of water management, conservation is, as I explained earlier in the presentation, conservation is the number one thing that the state is looking for us to do in order to replace groundwater pumping with conservation measures. One of those is minimizing lost and unaccounted for water. So what is lost and unaccounted for water? It's the difference between how much water we pump and the total amount of water that we sell through a meter. It can be caused by things like lines that break, lines that leak, a faulty meter that might misread, leakage from storage facilities, and illegal connections. ADWR requires that our unaccounted and lost water not exceed 10%. The City of Prescott has not exceeded 10%. In a 20-year average, our loss is at 8.7%. The 10-year average is 7.87, and the 5-year average is 7.81.
Hi, Gwen.
Hi.
I have a question. I'm looking at this graph, and it looks like last year we had I don't know if it's significant from your perspective or not, but at least on the graph, it looks like a bit of a step up. And going back to even 2018, it looks like the last 2 years prior, or 2 years after 2018 were a step up. Was there any specific identified reason for those step ups?
So I would attribute that to two things. One, when new development is building, they do flush the lines. That's a common practice to disinfect before we energize them for use. So that water is lost. And we have had several line breaks from PVC pipe over the last 2 or 3 years. It's one of the reasons we changed the code to not allow that anymore.
Right? Ductile iron.
We changed to ductile iron, yes. And so every time a pipe bursts in that manner, potentially hundreds of thousands of gallons of water are lost.
So from your perspective, those two items would account for the increase, and
Yes.
we have made modifications to mitigate those losses going forward, it sounds like?
That's what we're hoping to see as the trends continue, yes.
Okay.
And I just want to make a note, we still have a lot of plastic water mains
We still
in
have
the
a lot
ground.
on the ground, yes, that's true. That's true. Any other questions on this slide? Okay. So conservation, what do we do for conservation? As I previously noted, we participate in public events. We have education tools. We work with schools. Some of our water resource staff provide water site audits. As you know, that's been fairly successful. We offer our rebate and incentive program for turf removal, toilets, washing machines, rainwater harvesting. And we also have quite a few tools on our website. We have a native and low water use plant book there, as well as landscape designs. And this year we budgeted for and we've begun an overhaul to a water conservation page on our website. And so we're hoping to have even more tools available to the public here within the next 6 to 8 months. How did we do in terms of water usage over the last 20 years? Well, despite population changing from 34,000 to approximately 45,000, water use has remained relatively flat. You'll notice that in 2020, we did have an increase in water usage. That was largely attributed to lack of snowpack and increased potable water use outside during the drought, the long-term drought that this region is in.
Gwen, what is that graphic bar? How much in total, like an actual number, is that for 2020? What is that number?
I believe it's about 7,500 acre feet.
Thank you. I just think it's important to note something before we go any further, and I don't know if you were going to bring attention to this, that without the Big Chino, our ability is to pump on the book 16,501 acre feet of water. Is that pretty close? 544.
Repeat that, please.
Let me go back.
16,507. I just hadn't got that far yet. But yes, 16,000.
So I think it's really important for everybody to note this because that is more than double the actual pumping of today, correct?
Correct.
7,500 times 2 is 15,000.
Yep.
How many independent customers are we serving on the 7,500?
About 24,000 connections.
Okay, so easy math. 48,000 would be double, right?
connections.
And then we assume 2 people a house.
2.1. George, do you know, is it 2.1? 2.1 persons per household.
And what percentage of the 24,000 would you say are residential? 90, 95? Is that a good ballpark?
Craig's nodding his head yes, so I'm going to go
Okay,
with
so
that.
90% of 24,000, take 10% off. That's, say, just for argument's sake, 21,500 times 2 is 42,000, 43,000. So if you doubled that, you would service 86,000 independent residential customers within the confines of our existing supply without Big Chino. Is that math correct?
I'm headed there.
Okay.
But
Well, I
yes.
jumped ahead. But I think that's really important for everybody to note is that's doubling the population of this community without tapping the Big Chino water branch.
I think that's a very important thing to make note of, and you're going to get into that deeper. One of the things that I really appreciate this, as I looked over the information earlier, I noticed from the graph, and you've brought up for us, Gwen, is that with the exception of 2020, which was an anomalously dry year, we had people, watering their ponderosas in their yard so they wouldn't die, things like that. And you've explained the reason why water use was higher. If you look back over the last decade, you're exactly right. We're essentially looking at flat water usage in spite of, certainly not out of control growth, but in spite of steady growth in the Prescott area. That speaks well of our conservation efforts and potentially of the sustainability of our model if we make proper adjustments as we go along, which we're talking about today. So I appreciate that. Go ahead.
Anyone else? Okay. So one of the other ways that we monitor water use is through what we call gallons per capita per day. So how many gallons a day does each individual person use? In order to get a GPCD, we have to divide the total volume of water that's sold to all users. That means commercial, doctors, industrial, residential, to the number of people that are served. Because all of those commercial and businesses that support people who live here, they use water too in order to help people live here. So from the year 2000 to the year 2020, the GPCD was reduced from 170 gallons per capita per day to 112. And we had a low in 2020, the low was in 2019 of 107. So the increase in 2020 is again due to the fact that we pumped more water in 2020 due to the drought and the lack of snowpack, etc. So conservation measures are making a difference in this community. We're not at safe yield, but they are making a difference. So in 2005, the state passed House Bill 2277 that said Arizona water providers must develop a drought preparedness plan. In our city code 3-10-11, we outlined the restrictions that go into place during water shortages. That was adopted in 1992. The city updates that plan every 5 years, and on our homepage for water management, you will see that a new plan was updated in December of 2021 and sent to the state of Arizona. Essentially, the drought plan has 3 conservation levels. One is awareness, where we go out and we encourage people to use less water because we're having an issue. The second is restrictions, where the city could place restrictions such as no watering outside, no washing cars outside, things like that. And then the third level is emergency level. So the parameters of those are listed in our drought management plan. They are located directly in our city code if anyone wants to read them verbatim. But the drought management plan is based on 5 fundamental statements. We must provide a quantity of water to meet quality standards. We must minimize disruption of economic, business, and residential uses. We must maintain public trust through communication, what's happening. Provide a balanced and equitable plan, and provide a comprehensive, logical, and coordinated plan. And we have done those things.
Gwen, have we ever had to use our drought plan?
The longtime guy saying no. Yeah, more than 25 years.
Short time, guys.
More than 25 years here, he's saying no. We have not had to implement conservation measures, but we are required by the state to have a plan in the event that we do. And we do have that plan, and we update it. So here we're going to jump to where Michael, his brain went there, and that's good because this is what we're getting to anyway. So within the policy, here on the left side, you can see that we've outlined the 2009 decision in order. We have groundwater supplies in the amount of 9,466 acre feet, alternative supplies of 7,041 acre feet for a total physical available water supply of 16,507 acre feet. Well, how does that, I can see a question. You have a question?
You finish your thought, and then I'll ask my question.
All right. So how does that compare to the water resource management model, which is our planning tool that tells us how much water we are using, how much water we will use into the future? So in November of 2021, Leslie Grazer did a presentation for you in a work study on part 2 of our decision in order modification. These numbers were slightly different at that time as staff was still continuing to work through the data. These are the numbers that were submitted with our D&O modification. The current water usage is 9,328 acre feet. The committed demand, 3,534 acre feet, and the projected future demand is 1,667 acre feet for a total projected water demand at build-out of 14,529 acre feet. I will tell you that the projected demands are based on current zoning. So potential water uses that could go there based on the current zoning. It's footnoted here, again, that Big Chino supplies of 8,067 acre feet are not physically available. It's shown in the water policy, but it's noted that it's not physically available. And I've also footnoted here that the quantities are provisional based on ADWR's review of the city's decision in order application. So again, when we receive our modification to our D&O, these numbers may change. The water policy will change to reflect the numbers that the state accepts. I'm sure there are questions about this slide.
Go ahead.
So, Gwen, my question, I guess, is we're talking about what's physically available in terms of water resources. How do we know?
So part of the decision in order modification is a groundwater model that demonstrates physical supplies. We have to show that the water is physically available.
Sure.
A model comes from ADWR. They put a model out for the Prescott AMA, and then we use that model, and we input our projections into that model as well as the projections of all of the users within the AMA. So the model that we submit to the state is not just what the city is using or what the city projects to use, but what all other users within the Prescott AMA also project to use.
So the modeling is how we know.
The modeling is how we know.
Okay. So I just want to make sure. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to make it simple as possible for my understanding.
Yes.
So, and for those who don't speak and live in this language every day. So the other question I have, so the modeling, what are the limitations that we know exist within the modeling? I mean, let me put it this way. It's not as if the modeling is based on like some guy, burrowing down into the earth and then like measuring the water, right?
This is a scientific engineering analysis.
Sure. No, I get that, but I'm also saying like there's limitations to any scientific analysis.
Sure.
Sure.
And The other part that I think is important to speak to on the other side is these are assuming today's consumption rates with today's technology. We will never be worse than we are today in terms of changes in water and wastewater technology. If the changes in technology continue as they have over the past 15 or 20 years, when you've shown consumption rates go down from 170 gallons to 120, it's wonderful for us to take credit on conservation methodology and that's the answer. There's tons of that, but it's also toilet replacements and washing machines. And I think it's safe to assume that it's being conservative to assume 30 years out that consumptions of toilets and washer machines are going to look like they do today.
And to continue a little more, Councilman Montoya, yes, the model is science-based, and both our modelers as well as ADWRs, they use extensive information that they have from existing wells. They utilize information from all of our wells, depth to water, how it moves every year up and down. So ADWR sends staff out and they take physical measurements. So they're doing that throughout the AMA, and then that is what helped them create their model. That then our modelers also added additional information that we supplied to them to come together totally. As well as a couple other things on here, the current demand there. If people are thinking a couple slides back, we represented that we pumped 7,500 in 2020. This says that our current demand is 93. The difference there, this is our total current demand that we had. The water pumped that we sent out, as well as treated effluent that we sold to golf courses, to the sand and gravel operation, things like that. So this current demand is our total water used of all the types of waters combined that we have. And then one more with the committed. That committed includes all of the historical agreements, contracts, and reservations, i.e. AED, Deepwell Ranch, the ranch, Yavapai Hills, all those types of historical agreements that we have are included in that committed volume of water.
Does it also include the Yavapai Indian tribe?
It does.
Yes.
It does. Okay. But we're somewhat limited. We have, what is our arrangement with the Yavapai Indian tribe in terms of providing water?
They pretty much have first rights to water from us, and we have a volume of water in there for what their current demand is, as well as we did similar exercise that we did for all the rest of the platted properties associated with zoning. We have put a demand on all of their open land that if it was developed, that then there is a projected demand associated with their land.
Good to know. And then, so just to come back and not to beat the dead horse here, but the modeling is what informs it. And that modeling, again, I'm just trying to make this as simple as possible for myself, is based off of well reading that ADWR does.
Many things. Well readings.
Well, so one of the more, okay, so what are some of those other things?
Then they come into geology, the ability of our land to hold the water. They have studies, information on the water movement. And now we're getting beyond my ability. I don't have.
Okay. And I won't ask you to go much further down that, but I guess my question to a certain degree is, so that's great modeling. It sounds good. How frequently is that modeling updated right now?
The information is gathered continually every year.
Okay.
As far as how often they update it, they just produced that model during 2021 because it was a little late coming out, so that slowed our progress down. But it was just released.
So we're relatively current on the data that we have available.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And I would say that also includes all those test wells that we put together and monitored and submitted that data to ADWR along with our decision order.
Well, there's test wells associated with the Big Chino Water Ranch, and no, those wouldn't necessarily be in here, being Big Chino versus Little Chino aquifers. They may be using some of it, but it's not going to be directly correlated to it.
Yeah, because we're going to be showing to ADWR if we were to import water from the Big Chino, then what would the potential impact be on the flow of the Verde River from those test wells?
Yeah, and that modeling is going on subsequently for that area.
But there's also data in those test wells that could be applicable because it does measure the water table.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
Well, and there's actually, I've talked in round numbers, but if we build out and it's 14,529 acre feet, that's actually a 12% wiggle room with the assumption of 16,507. You're only using 88% of your approved capacity, which is already built into these numbers.
It's actually higher, isn't it? It's like 14 or 15%.
It's in that
Yeah.
ballpark. Yeah.
Gwen, the state says that we as a water provider cannot show a 100-year water supply if we get down below 1,000 feet below the surface
That's
for
correct.
water. What are our well levels in Chino Valley?
We're in the range of 180 to about 240 feet.
Okay. And at the airport?
At the airport's a little deeper. We're in the 450 range.
So we have a long way to go. A lot of water to go through. And that's if it doesn't get recharged at all. So just saying.
Is the recharge process, as Gwen, as you and Craig understand it, is it instantaneous when recharged? Does it go immediately back into the well field? I'm being kind of facetious because it probably doesn't.
No,
right?
it's a percolation factor, and there's an assumption that it takes a while, and it does.
I mean, I've heard estimates that it could take as long as 100 years for water to get back.
Yeah, I don't know who's done really good data research on that. I guess we could put blue color into the
Yeah, if
the recharge water. Like,
Not going to work.
and we can get 6 experts together regarding that. We'll have 6 opinions. And again, I'm not that geologist. I'm a lot simpler when it comes to that. What I do know and what I see is when we have a very good wet winter and Granite Creek, our lakes are full and we're spilling and the creek is flowing, within about 2 months' time, we see a difference in our wells in Chino Valley and or quicker than that at the airport water reclamation facility, that we see the positive influences of that water.
Sure. Thank you.
Did you have another question, Councilwoman Hall?
Yes, yeah. So this kind of gets away from specifically what we're talking about here, but it's regarding wells. So as we're allotted this much, obviously we have our X acre feet, but if we are, let's say one of our conservation efforts is we try to convert the people that are in the city limits from wells onto city water or outside or whatever the case may be. So the ultimate goal, obviously, I think it's a pretty, well, you guys will probably answer this better, a general consensus, it's better for someone to be on metered water than a well when you're specifically talking about water conservation, because there's obviously financial burden. Is that correct, or is that not something that's accepted
no, it's
across
correct,
the
Councilwoman Hall. The benefit is the 70% recharge
right
system wide.
in addition to usage monitoring?
It's the return. But yes, when generally, if you receive a bill for the amount of water you use, there's a higher level of accountability
Yeah.
in how much you might use.
Yeah.
That would be
even just the reporting of it. And if, let's say you don't care, right? You've got enough money, you don't care if your water bills, but then at least I know we were on a well before and the water, you've got a line that breaks and a lot of people don't watch the meters that are on their wells. But my question goes to, when it comes to what we're allotted, do we know how many wells we have on in the city of Prescott? I know that's numbers floated around before, but I just am curious if we converted everybody who was on a well to city water, do we know how much that eats into our build out plans?
I think Herb Dishlip ran that number at some point. I don't know. You guys
we
are
would
gonna have
show
it.
those as potential future.
Oh, okay. So is that in committed or projected
They would
numbers?
be in the
Everyone who's
projected number, yes. Those would be included in the projected number.
Oh, okay, wonderful. And
we're
that
not serving
committed
them.
and I'm sorry. Oh, I thought you said something else. The committed and projected number, that's everything that's been annexed into the city and what they could build is that worst case scenario, average, projected?
No, it's assumption that it's the maximum number of units.
So the committed number are lots that are platted, but the homes haven't been constructed yet.
Okay.
So eventually, over time, you'll see some of the numbers in the committed category move into the current category as homes are built on those lots.
But you'll probably never see every single lot that has an allocation get water, because some people that have a committed allocation for their lot bought the lot next door, or
Right. Yeah.
the topo is so dramatically difficult that they're never going to put a house on it,
Or they just want to
right.
their neighbors.
So this assumption isn't an average; it's the worst case scenario. Correct.
I don't know if I'd say worst case scenario.
Well, okay,
It
you're being
is
the maximum amount.
with the information that we have, the worm, knowing how much all the customers are using, this is the most accurate estimate.
Right. Assuming that everything gets built on.
Yes.
That's the point I was trying to
Under its current zoning.
Right.
Okay. So with regard to wells, and I'm sorry, I keep going back to this, but well, I guess we wouldn't care, right? If you're saying, so this is in the committed or projected, if we were to make one of our conservation, I'm sure you already do this, but one of our conservation efforts is everyone in the city who's on a well, we want is over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years to see them converted to City of Prescott water in the effort of reducing usage.
It becomes a cost-benefit analysis, to be quite honest, because there are tremendous topo challenges in some locations, and there's a really good reason a lot of people are on a well and a septic tank. So it becomes, does the city absorb all the costs to get them hooked up? Do we absorb a portion? And you saw a little bit of that dialogue when Councilman Blair was looking at, trying to hook up stuff around the airport. The historical realities of septic tanks and wells in Prescott is because of difficulties with topo. In a perfect world, you'd hook everybody up and move on. I don't know that there'll ever be a day, and it certainly won't be in any of our lifetimes, when there's nobody on a well and a septic tank in Prescott.
Right. And I completely understand that. And I absolutely understand that. But you're telling me that even if over the next 20 years we converted everybody in the city limits to a well, we are still at a 14% buffer without touching the big Chino. Do I understand that correctly? Okay.
Yes.
A couple of other things that came up. So with the committed, there are properties that are not annexed into the city that are in that committed. There are agreements, contracts in that cover properties that haven't been annexed, and or in the county that won't necessarily be annexed. And then again, the committed is even more than the platted. It's master planned areas like AED. Well, AED isn't master plan, but AED has a development agreement, so that is in that committed volume.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, so the only variation would be if there were future annexations that aren't calculated here or projected, and then what zoning exists. So how many residential units could be put in those areas with that zoning? So if we change zoning or made it more dense or less dense, then of course that would change that number as well. And even though we have currently this 16,000 acre feet legal authority to commit for development, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what we will do or what we should do. I think as technology advances, as City Manager mentioned, and as more people become educated on how best to use water in a conservative manner, then our ability to manage that long-term build-out in a way that's responsible, I think, will be enhanced. So there's a difference between what you are allowed to do and what is appropriate and how you should do it. And that's where we're kind of dealing with this change of policy to try to emphasize what we should be doing rather than what we're allowed to do.
Okay, and is the should be doing based on concerns about Arizona running water? Is should because of City of Prescott stand? Where is the should coming from versus
Well, the
our
should
legal?
would come from looking at where our future is, how best we can manage that future, also what the impact is with our neighbors' policies, because we're not the only one in the AMA, and then how we can be a leader within our neighboring communities to be able to say if we all agreed together on how best to manage our water, then our ability to have a future that is projected and kind of legitimate, I think, would be enhanced. Because everybody's kind of grabbing at how much water is available. And we've always had a bit of a competitive environment with our neighbors, and with more of a agreed upon way of managing the water demand, then I think we can create a future that's more sustainable without necessarily having to deal with what the legislature does or what the Central Arizona Project and the impact on the declining levels of water in Lake Mead and the Colorado River.
Okay, so you're basically saying that although Prescott's impact, given how much acre feet we're using, this 16,000 or 14,000, whichever it is, you're saying that we should not use what we're legally authorized to give to the city of Prescott residences to start sort of a trend with surrounding areas to follow that same path? Like a lead by example type situation?
I think it's very much a lead by example. I think when you look at the gallons per capita per day numbers, and you even compare those with some other cities like Albuquerque and Flagstaff, we're doing very, very well when it comes to that.
Right.
But we still have to be able to look that we have a restricted aquifer that has a limited amount of capacity. We don't know exactly what that capacity is, but we are seeing a decline in the water table. So we have to be sensitive to the fact that if we continue to have unrestricted rampant growth, then that water table may decline to the point where the Verde River becomes impacted, and then we're in a big legal fight with the Salt River Project about how we can manage our future.
Okay, so that's from a very big perspective, right? And I understand what you're saying and what your point is. I don't know that I agree that if we use less of what we're legally authorized to do, that Prescott Valley will follow or Chino Valley will follow. I mean, is that what you're saying? Is you believe if we use less, that Prescott Valley will build and use less?
I think if we become a model for how well to use water in an efficient manner, and we have our neighbors that agree that they want to have a sustainable future that they can plan for, then we're much better off leading in that direction than just becoming a competitor.
Okay, and has there been Chino and Prescott Valley conversations that would lead to believe that they're going to develop and use less if we use less of ours?
There have been conversations with that, and of course the last water policy where we extended water outside city limits to Chino Valley for their development of their downtown core so that they would have some more likely development for their commercial core, certainly put us in more of a cooperative relationship than it had been in the past.
Okay, and Mr. Lamar, maybe I can ask you this. Do you believe that to be the case as well if we
I think that
lead by...
Chino Valley being part of our system gives us some opportunities and advantages because we're kind of in it together. I think that they were very receptive to some of the conservation measures that we have talked about for our system. Anytime you have an entity that's kind of a collaborator and a partner, I think you have some leverage. I think that Prescott Valley, under some of the current leadership, there's more of an opportunity than there's been in the past. I used to hear a lot from PV that the best way for us to get into safe yield is to pump the big Chino. And I've always had the counter argument that you can't tell me that taking the water from the ground, pumping it all the way down here, using a ton of it and recharging a little bit puts you in a better position to get to safe yield. I'm not a geologist, but I'm not stupid. Leaving the water in the ground is a better answer from the overall water portfolio of the state of Arizona. Now, you can make an argument that you could take it from Big Chino, pump it into RMA, make us look better, and then bleed Williams to death. I don't think that's what makes sense when you talk in a global perspective. But I haven't heard that in 6 months or a year now. So that makes me think that possibly there's more opportunities to work together with them than there have been historically.
Interesting. And then one more question, if you'll allow me. So is there any, and maybe this would be for Mr. Pedracki, is there any legal repercussion to the AMA saying, or I'm sorry, us saying, here, you can use all this water?
No, I can answer the question. There is no teeth to it. The safe yield has no teeth.
The safe yield? No, I mean if.
Well, it doesn't. We are never going to be penalized for not reaching safe yield unless they change the law.
No, I'm sorry. That's not my question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. My question is, the state's given us water. Do we have any legal responsibility as the city who has been given this water by the state to provide it to our citizens?
Let's clarify. The state has given us the authority to be able to manage and allocate that water.
Right.
So, water is fungible below the surface. It doesn't belong to anybody. Once we pump it out, then we have the ability to distribute it, and it then becomes usable and allocated from a legal perspective. And maybe I should defer to a water attorney.
Water
here.
expert. But I don't know if you can answer this better than I can, but I don't know if the state gives us water to begin with, or is it more of a model and it administers our water that we have?
More of a giving us water it's more of an approval, kind of like a permitting approval process. So in order to get that 16,500 acre feet, we had to submit an application and prove to the state that it was legally available, physically available, continuously available. So we had to show that that water was around, and then they said, okay, that's what you can use with the goal to safe yield. I think your question was, now that the state has given
whatever
us
the
or
term is. I'm not
us-
sure. Allotted, legally defined that this is the acre feet. Okay.
Yes, once they've done that for us, are we obligated then to serve that water? That's
correct.
That was more of your question.
Yeah,
So I don't have a straight yes or no answer for you, but we are a designated assured water supplier. So our water situation is much more secure than a non-designated provider or a developer that has to go and get its own certificate of bringing water to the table. So we are kind of obligated in the sense that we've been designated as someone who has a great water supply for 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
And as was said, there's no technical teeth on we're not in safe yield. But, if you look to the Groundwater Management Act and the way that things are going, it's not unheard of or wouldn't be surprising to have the legislature put some more teeth once they see that it's been this long, we're still pretty far away. But as of right now, there's no real...
Well, to Dana, can I just to your point a little bit, this morning at the Water Issues Subcommittee meeting, we looked at a graph provided by the ADWR that was only through 2018, and it's clear that we've been out of safe yield and never really gotten anywhere close to that. And I guess the frustrating part for, I think, some people is that they look at other municipalities who have done better. Tucson being an example that comes to mind for me when you look at their AMA. And so I guess from my perspective, I think about this idea that safe yield, there are no teeth to it, to Michael's point. But do we have an obligation to be better water users globally? Sure. I would say the answer is yes. And I guess we also have to be aware that while we are doing very well, historically, the problem has always been that other municipalities don't do as well as we do. And I think to the mayor's point, there's an opportunity to lead because we are an assured water supplier. And the city manager or the town manager of Prescott Valley said in the Quad City Business News the other day that Prescott Valley faces a water crisis. And so I think there's some awareness around this and there's some opportunity, which is why I think revisiting this water policy writ large is a good idea.
Good point.
But Prescott Valley, and maybe I'm not sure if this is a question for you or not, but Prescott Valley is very fundamentally different than we are, right? So they have to purchase water in order to do a development. So that developer, it's not the town who is given that authority or that right or that, whatever you want to call it. Let's just call it a water right. They are then building a development and is an independent person who is purchasing it. It is not a state level giving a city an authority to then use that amount of water. So from the city's level, do we here on the dais even have the authority? Let's say hypothetical. We wanted to say we don't want to use one more drop of water. We want to stop every piece of water, no more water until we're at safe yield. Would we even have the authority to do that? Isn't it our obligation as being people who are given this water right from the state to?
I don't want to. I'm not going to get into the legal part, but even if you could, let's say that's a big if, and I'm not going to answer that. There's no laws against putting a well and a septic tank in Arizona.
Right.
So the idea that somehow you would stop somebody from putting a house down is complete garbage, because they would find another way to do it if you drew a line in the sand and said you're not going to provide any more water.
But doesn't market pressure come into place there?
Yeah.
I mean, because we all know that a house on a well is less valuable than a house that has assured water supply.
But not enough financial difference to justify the difference.
Well,
I just built $1 million house in Prescott.
Yeah, and you could look at the value of the homes in Williamson Valley. I don't know that they're suffering too much. Some of them are on a private system, and some of them are wells and septic tanks too. So.
Right. But I guess my question is more from a constituent's perspective, right? I want to come in, I want to build a house. I'm going to, whatever the difference is. I think Prescott, you can justify the price difference between what it costs to hook up and what it costs to dig a well. But I do see what it obviously, of course, is more beneficial to be on City of Prescott water. But if I'm building a house, can the city just tell me no if we don't want any more water?
No.
Councilman Shishka, you had a question and been waiting very patiently.
Yeah,
Sorry, Mr. Shishka.
That's
Sorry,
quite all right. Just an aside, my feeling's always been that if we built a wall around Prescott, people would build right outside the wall. But my main question, Gwen, is when we compare ourselves with other communities like Phoenix and Tucson, isn't the Central Arizona project part of their water situation?
Oh yeah.
And then I'll just lead into that. You'll see lately in the newspaper that Governor Ducey is going to make water a priority for his last year in office. So I'm curious to see.
And I guess where I'm going with this is, if it is, then without the Central Arizona project, would they be in as good a position as they are?
No.
Okay.
With Tucson, that's exactly, and I know we had a little discussion about that this morning. That's exactly what is bringing their groundwater mining down to almost zero. All of the CAP water that goes to Tucson goes out into the Avon Valley area, into recharge ponds, and it's all being recharged. So then that is what is counteracting then to show that.
They don't drink it.
Correct.
Well, let's let Gwen continue on. There's still quite a bit of information that we want to hear.
And I'll
Thank you,
save
Mayor.
the anti-moratorium statute for another day, then. As to your point.
Can't do it.
It's all good discussion. Thank you for the feedback. So we'll just continue here on the draft policy. So I've concluded the first part of the policy, which is the fundamentals, the background and information, and the measures that we take to manage our water. The next part of the presentation are the 24 policy statements that have been drafted. They fall into 5 categories. One for new applications. The second is water budget, existing contracts, water outside the city limits, and the water portfolio. So the first policy, in order to receive water service from the city, a water service application shall be submitted and must include a formal site plan or a preliminary or final plat application. So it was the desire of the group to have more oversight on land development as it relates to water, and this goes back to that tie that the state is looking for the correlation between growth and water use. That any new application be tied to either a plat or to a formal site plan approval. And plats as well as site plan approval go to the Planning and Zoning Commission and then ultimately to the council.
Gwen, do you want to talk about how this would work in practice? I think that there's value to that. Or does Bryn want to talk about how this would work in practice?
I'm happy to talk about how the
George.
process would work. An applicant.
And why it's a good policy change for some of the things that we've faced recently.
So an applicant would typically come to our pre-application conference process. During that process, staff would disclose any requirements for the project to move forward, including the approval of either a site plan or a preliminary plat if it's subject to the subdivision rules. Once the applicant begins to develop their project through engineering or architects, they would bring that site plan and make application to the city for formal site plan approval. Those site plans go before the Planning and Zoning Commission, where they're vetted that they would meet the requirements of city code, for example, access, height limitations, landscaping requirements, anything related to the site, parking, et cetera, et cetera. In the same parallel path, or shortly after it goes to Planning and Zoning Commission, it would go to the Water Issues Subcommittee for review and a recommendation for the water that would be required to support that development. Once there's a recommendation from those two bodies, it would then be presented to the City Council for approval, holistically the water approval with the site plan approval or the plat approval.
How does that work versus goes on now? There's no
So currently their
approval requirement.
preliminary and final plats follow that process now, but not all projects are subject to subdivision rules. So for the example, the multifamily projects are not necessarily subject to subdivision rules. And they would, in turn, under this policy, go through a formal site plan approval. So it would be a public process, both at the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Water Issues Subcommittee, and the council would all be a public process where it could be vetted.
Gwen, can I ask you a question? What if it changes between preliminary plat and final plat? What happens in this process?
So the rules require that a final plat be in substantial conformance with the preliminary plat. So if it is not, then the preliminary plat has to be amended and they would have to go back through the process and amend the preliminary plat.
So substantial conformance would be tweaking around the margins. If you went from, say, an office complex, to a multifamily
To an
development.
apartment complex?
Yeah, that would be a substantial change. Yeah, well, George is nodding his head yes.
Well, first of all, you're talking about a subdivision plat. And
No, we're not talking about that neighborhood. I'm just talking in generalities.
Right, but if a property is zoned for a multifamily project.
No, but if it's zoned business general and it shows an office and then it comes back and shows something else, they would not have. I thought that we were.
The plat does not reflect the use. The zoning determines the use.
So they would not have to go through the process again.
No.
Well, then that doesn't really accomplish what he wants.
No, it doesn't. Site plan
It's a big
review
loophole.
requires that planning and zoning address the items that Gwen referenced: access, circulation through the project, all of the elements that we look
Okay,
at.
so we would
when
not.
Site plan review occurs.
So, Bryn, are we talking now about LDC items versus water policy? I'm just,
Yes.
okay.
Okay, I'm
Yes,
talking
and
about the
they
water specifically.
interact. I'm sorry?
I'm talking about the water specifically. That would have to go through the process. No.
So anything that would use over 1
Acre foot would have to go back
would go to the Water Issues Subcommittee
and through the council again.
and through the council. Yes.
Yes, and that is determined by the water
Okay,
policy.
you and I are saying, I wasn't trying to get you involved in it.
no worries.
That's okay.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. But the
But
water over 1 acre foot would have to go through a public vetting again.
okay. So if it changed
Yes.
from, say, I'm just making up a number here, 6 acre foot of water on a certain specific use,
Yeah.
up to, say, 20 acre feet of water, would that require a revisiting of the Water Issues Subcommittee?
It would.
Yes.
Thank you.
So if it's
Sorry.
Mr. Mayor, can I just get clarification? Are none of these policies exist now? Is that correct? These are all proposals for the new water policy.
Some of them are already on the books but are being changed around the margins. This is significantly different. Item 1.
This specific policy number 1. Okay.
Gwen,
The requirement for site plan approval is new.
Okay.
We still require an application for water service for new development if their usage is over 2 acre-feet under the current policy.
Okay. And these 24 policies, whether we had 5 of them or 2 of them or 4 of them, how are these? They're changed. I'm just trying to understand how we got to this.
Yeah, it was a collective, collaborative discussion with the mayor leading. Here are some things that he believes that this council is going to want to look at. One of which is, in instances when there's over 1 acre-foot of water, that if there's a dramatic change in the usage of the water, that goes through a public vetting process, which includes going to water subcommittee and the council. Is that correct, Mayor? Did I articulate?
Correct.
Now, the policy 2, you're going to see there was an allotment for administrative approval, but the allotment of acre-feet of water has now changed. So when I say that there's changes around the margins on some of these, this policy 2 is a good example. Is it not, Gwen?
It is.
And we could talk about what the change is if you want to.
I mean, one of the underlying factors was, 4 or 5 years ago, we were talking about 0.35 per residential home. And as we analyzed the actual use through the worm and also Herb Dishlip's analysis, we realized that many of these homes were using much, much less water. So with that more correct analysis, rather than allowing administrative approval for developments with water requirements that really were far in excess of what was needed, then I think bringing this number back down to a more appropriate level that allows the public to be informed and allows the council and the members of the Water Issues Committee to review the demands, will have the ability to be able to designate and allocate water in a more responsible and appropriate manner.
Mayor, is this for projects going forward?
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to apply this to previously approved projects and previously approved contracts. So this would be for new applications.
Okay, thank you.
That's correct.
Michael, just to go back to the comment and a little bit of the lack of clarity around the land use components of it. Some of the feedback that I did receive from some constituents regarding this policy was trying to understand that. So if I could be so bold as to provide some feedback that this first policy, I think there's still a little bit ambiguity there around the edges.
You saw that just between Brenda and I. Yeah, the water consumption is what triggers the new process for somebody to have to go through it again. Because, and to Bryn's point, she's dead on. You can't take somebody's vested rights on a land development away.
Sure.
But you could force someone to go through an additional process for water allocation that doesn't look like what the initial allocation looked like on a site plan.
Right, and I think
more articulate.
I'm following you for what it's worth. So I guess my feedback would be it still reads a little baggy there. I don't know that it quite emphasizes. I understand what you're saying. I understand what Bryn's saying. I understand the nuance of the land use piece of it. Yeah. But I think this policy as it's written right now doesn't quite convey what the overarching idea is.
Completely fair criticism, Councilman. We just need to figure out how to clean this up and still accomplish what we need to accomplish. And any suggestions you guys have or the public has, we're more than, we're all ears, because you see what we're trying to do. It's just how you're going to do it in terms of semantics and verbiage.
Would it be possible to include either background or changes when we're reviewing these in study session, just for clarity of this is why policy number 1 was written, right? If you're saying we want to take it out of just administrative review and bring it to council, this is why you would like policy number 1 in there. Or currently we don't do this at all, we'd like it to do this. Is there any way to clarify or clean that up for the public? I think
we could provide some additional, what my assumption is to why we're having this dialogue. If the manager thinks this is the reason that this dialogue is being brought forward by the mayor and why council's considering it. I think I could do that on policy 2. Policy 2, it's the administrative discretion. To the mayor's point, I think the mayor felt like, and I think some of the council members, was too high because 0.17 allows for a lot more units than 0.35. Is that?
Absolutely.
So if I was going to put a note at the bottom, it would be administrative approval is appropriate on small cases, case-by-case basis. However, with the change from 0.35 to 0.17, it's too many units. So we need to lower the acre feet amount that's administratively approvable. Does that articulate what we're trying to do?
That's a good summary.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if that's something that can be added for future study
I could
sessions,
we
but
could
that
work
would be
on something
wonderful.
together on all 24 of them of why we think these things are happening.
Sure. And I can interject as much as I can here today as well to help you have a
yeah,
better
I can
feel
take
for that.
notes so you don't have to.
So Mr. Lamar is correct. Policy 2 has to do with administrative approvals of some projects. The reason that 8 multifamily was chosen is because we apply a multiplier of 0.12, and 8 multifamily dwelling units is the equivalent of 1 acre foot. Currently, the policy says that 2 acre foot and under can be administratively approved, so this would be a reduction to allow more oversight of projects by the Water Issues Subcommittee, Planning Zoning Commission, and the Council. It also says up to 4 single-family residential units. That's because at 4 single-family residential units, the subdivision rules kick in. So once the subdivision rules are applied, they have to go through the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Water Issues Subcommittee, and ultimately the Council for approval of their project. We also chose 1 acre foot for non-residential uses, so commercial or industrial uses that have very low water usage. If you have a business and their only water use is landscaping outside and maybe a bathroom or 2, they're not even going to use half an acre foot at that site location. So it seemed excessive to make them go through a full public review process for a project of that size when we want to encourage commercial uses that employ people or bring sales tax into the city. So that's why those numbers were chosen for policy number 2. It's also important to note that under policy 2, it says that the city manager or their designee, which essentially is staff, can direct any request for water. If we look at a project and we disagree with the applicant's assessment of how much water they may use, we can direct that go through a public process. They're not necessarily going through the administrative process if staff or the city manager determine that a public process for that project would be necessary.
Right. So in other words, if we don't believe that the data we're getting about the nature of the consumption, we can kick it to you guys to go through a public process as well.
Okay. And then do you have any concerns about applicants who are certain of their property right and their water usage?
No,
Us delaying them for...
No, we have such good data about similarly situated businesses. Like, Councilman Montoya's type business, there's other people doing that in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
If he was to come in and say that I'm going to use 0.000000001 acre foot, I'd be like, I think he's pretty good at conserving, but every once in a while he's going to flush his toilet, right?
Hopefully.
Wash his hands, maybe.
I would challenge that and make him go through the process. But there's nobody is really going to come with something that's completely out of the wall that we think at this acre foot allotment that would.
Michael,
Yeah.
can I ask you a question about the city manager or designee may direct any request to council? Do you guys, and this is just a question that may or may not, maybe it's obvious from your perspective, but I think it may be less obvious to the public or even to members of this council. What is your decision tree process for that beyond what you outlined?
Yeah, I articulated somebody that's coming with telling us something that's not appropriate in terms of data we have about existing conditions that show the nature of consumption for a similarly situated business. That would be one trigger point. I guess if I was looking at a project that had tremendous topo challenges or was in a certain type of redevelopment climate, I could conceivably see something that I would feel like yeah, I could go up to an acre foot, but boy, I'm thinking that this is going to be a lot of drilling, and potentially this is something that council might want to look at. Now, we landed on this 1 acre foot. Staff is completely comfortable if you just want to take administrative discretion totally away. It's just if you do that, you're going to have some instances where you're delaying people and unnecessarily.
And I think an administrative approval needs to
At
exist.
some level,
Yeah,
makes
it needs to
sense.
exist. It's just a question of what the process
Where you
is
do it.
for, where the line exists and how you guys define that line a little bit.
Yep.
And I thought it was appropriate that we align the definitions of subdivisions with the amount of water that they're going to apply to have provided for them. Because otherwise they could get a water allocation before they even have their subdivision reviewed. And then there's almost a pre-expectation that their subdivision is going to be
Good point.
approved because they already have the water.
And the other thing is you don't want to
Versa would occur as well.
You don't want to take the incentive away. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mayor. These are one-off infill lots that holistically, you kind of want that, right? So you want to grease the skid as much as that you feel comfortable with people being able to do those without a lot of red tape, because they're going to have to run into other problems and costs.
Ready for policy 3?
Let's go.
All right, let's go. See if it. Oh, I had to wake it up. I think it went to sleep. All right, so policy 3. Policy 3 has to do with estimating water usage by similar project types. So as we get further into the policies, there'll be a policy about a demand analysis. And there aren't a lot of resources out there for professionals to use in terms of estimating water demands. They can use the plumbing codes. Those are fairly conservative. But again, we know from the WORM, it's a long-range planning tool. We know what the average use is per single-family residence. We know what the average use citywide is for multifamily residents. And so rather than have an applicant go to an expense that's not necessary, because we know what those uses are based on our other requirements here in the city for low water plantings, building code requirements, we know what those numbers are. Oftentimes, those estimates will come in and they're extremely high. They're not even close to what these numbers are. So policy 3 is a reflection of the water resource management model. This would be updated annually as well. If the WORM numbers were to change, we would adjust these numbers accordingly. Essentially, single-family residential at this time is at 0.17 acre foot per dwelling unit. Multifamily residential is at 0.12. And the city is using 1.5 acre foot per acre of landscaped area, which is an ADWR guideline. We're using their planting low drought tolerant list. We use their watering guideline of 1.5 acre feet per year of acre of landscaped area. That was a tongue twister, but yes. Any questions on policy 3? Policy 4 has to do with requiring a demand analysis for non-residential projects. So commercial projects, we require the demand analysis because water uses can vary greatly from one commercial industrial type use to another. One may have, again, it's a warehouse with a couple of restrooms. Another may be using water in the processing or manufacturing of whatever they do. And so we want to know what those demands are. We have found that the best source for a demand for non-residential uses is another facility that they currently own and operate. They can provide us with utility billing records that show us what their water consumption has been over a year or 2 or 3 years, however long they go back. That is usually the most reliable source of what their water consumption will typically be. However, if they don't have an existing facility, we can look within our own water resource management model and see if we have an existing facility similar to that. A grocery store is a grocery store is a grocery store. So if generally grocery stores have other facilities, but if they didn't, we would go into the water resource management model and look at what all the other grocery stores in Prescott are doing and get a good idea of how much water they might use. Excuse me.
This is an interesting one, and I know I don't want to belabor the point because I know we got a ton to get through, but what we're seeing in a lot of instances is an engineer that is working on a private project doesn't want to overpromise and underdeliver on water consumption. So they factor in like a fourfold overage about water usage. And then when you look at like actual facility type, the water usage is not just like a tenth off, it's off by 50%,
10 or more.
which is odd, but I understand it. But I just thought that was interesting as we looked at the data. It goes to how important using actual consumption rates of like businesses is versus even experts' opinions.
So does this include, this is all new builds, or it says projects, that's just new builds? That's not someone who's taking over, you know, an older commercial building and doing a new
So in some cases, if one use vacates an existing location and a new use comes in, we would require a demand analysis. For example, if a building is being used for offices and it changes to a fast food restaurant, we want to know how much water they will be using, and they would have to go before the water issues subcommittee and site plan approval to do their project.
And do we do this now in any fashion?
If the water usage is greater than 2 acre-feet, yes.
We have them hire a civil
We
engineer
do that currently.
and require that for everybody.
If
What
it's
about
two
our surrounding cities? Do the other people that we're sort of competing with for commercial business do the same thing?
I do not believe so.
You know,
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry. I got or give you some feedback on this with this specific policy. I guess the one thing, and this is kind of in the document, and I think I've given this feedback before to you, Gwen, and Craig, and Michael, maybe as well. One thing I'd like to see is a little bit more clarification. I feel like when we say the city, broadly speaking, that's a bit ambiguous, and so. Whereas the previous language said city manager or designee, there's some language stuff in here that I guess that's throughout the document I see. And it would be nice to know what that process is. Again, I think from your guys' perspective, it's probably pretty clear what that process looks like. But I think as a document that's forward facing to the public, it's important to clarify what that process looks like.
We'll look at that, and I think that's a good addition or a suggestion. Thank you.
So policy 5 is similar. It says that the
Gwen,
city...
sorry, I think Councilman Sischka.
Did someone else have a
I
comment?
had a question. My concern about this is, killing the goose that laid the golden egg. I do know that what I'd like to see is a policy which says that the city will go to the hilt to help you determine what your consumption may be from comparisons or whatever before you say, oh, got to go to a civil engineer and go through that whole thing. Because like Councilwoman Hall said, we have competitors. We want commercial, we want industrial, and I think that it's to our benefit to make that as clear as possible and as customer service potential as possible.
Agreed.
And to your point, Councilman Shiska, Gwen and I just experienced that a couple months ago in regards to a distribution center that's coming to our community. When the numbers first came in, we looked at them. We said, there's no way in the world. So the engineer had included all employees for the center like they were going to be at that facility the entire day. And we know that a very high percentage.
Right? This is like a 24/7 facility. Yeah.
And we know that a very high percentage comes there, they get their trucks, and they're headed out. So we knew it wasn't real. So then we helped them, and we went to the point of another facility that they have in order to be able to compare how that percentage worked out.
Would it be possible just to get general consensus? What if it said something, the city will assist with providing a water demand analysis based on like customers. If such an analysis cannot be made or determined, then it will be performed by a civil engineer.
I think that's much more realistic. The idea of, I think
is
civil
everybody
engineers
okay with
are-
that? Some language like that?
I think that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments on this one? Okay. So policy 5 has to do with the city potentially requiring a cost-benefit analysis for any project. So this is in the current code now. However, it's typically used more for larger new commercial development and or lands outside the city that may be annexed into the city to see what the benefit of bringing that development into the city might be. And that's why it says that the city may require a cost-benefit analysis. So this language is not different from what is in the current code, but it can, in some cases, help the city to evaluate whether or not the project would be an appropriate use of land and the water resource that is associated with it.
Do you guys have concerns about that slowing down the commercial growth of Prescott?
No, I think that the common sense approach on this is going to be okay. Are there projects, specific projects that are going to be such water hogs that we need to look at it a little closer?
Like Pure Wafer, for instance?
I don't know what you're talking about. But yeah, something like that. Now, you could put some teeth in, not teeth, but you could have some set standards as to when this would be applicable. But I think there are one-off instances where we'd really like a cost-benefit analysis, even as a staff. Is that, you guys are nodding your heads?
Yes, and that's why it says may, and that would be something we would disclose as early as pre-application conference to a potential applicant that we know would be a high water user.
Now, to Brandon's point a few moments ago, you could define what the city is. Is that done at the administrative level? Or if we decide as an administrative staff that we like a cost benefit, should we kick it up to you guys to decide that you actually do want one? I don't.
I think that's a good point, because there may be times when whatever the commercial project is might be worth it, right?
Yeah. Like, chip plants. They use a ton of water, but they provide a ton of jobs. Now, I'm not saying we need one here, anybody, but there's a lot of communities that think that they're a really good economic engine. So you sort of do this, right? I don't care if the cost-benefit analysis is determined by council. If that's something you guys...
And also, this is existing in our current policy. So this isn't like a new burden or a new item.
Right.
We currently do this.
So I was going to say, again, I think that some communication in this one, again, about, I'm not opposed to an administrative process on it personally, from my perspective, but I think outlaying what that process looks like and when that gets kicked over, or if you guys don't want the burden of that administrative process, that's fine too. But I don't know that I have opposition to it.
I just think this probably would only be triggered if there was some very unique, unusual business proposal that we'd never seen before, and it might have a significant amount of water component. Then we'd have to take a look and balance whether the benefit justifies the demand.
Well, and I think, Mayor, you make an excellent point. Those are going to be one-offs that maybe just having them come to you guys makes sense, because you're only going to be dealing with this once a generation, maybe. I mean,
yeah, it would be very rare. I mean, as Craig was mentioning, it has been in the policy, but when was the last time it was even triggered to generate a cost-benefit analysis?
Yeah, AED or deep well annexations typically is when we see it.
Well, once a generation, right?
twice in 2 years.
Yeah, once a year. If you look at that, there you go.
All right, so moving on. Policy 6. Water service applications will expire a year after the date the application was submitted if the project that they submitted for is not considered by the Water Issue Subcommittee or administratively approved. So we do not currently have this language. This would be new language where applications would expire so they don't just linger.
I think that's wonderful.
So the Water Issues Committee could say, we don't like your project and we're not going to listen, we're not going to hear you?
We never do that. I'm just going to put it out there on the record. If someone makes an application to the city for water service, it eventually will either be administratively approved or it will come before the Water Issues Subcommittee. This policy says If it doesn't do one of those two things within a year, they have to reapply.
Isn't the virtue of part of this because part of this policy later on establishes a water budget? And so
That's correct.
like you don't want people who have gotten an approval just sitting on it and then tying up potential water assets
That's exactly
from
right.
other potential applicants.
The staff doesn't have like a pocket veto where we can say, oh, we don't like this, we're just going to sit on it. We have to process applications whether we like them or not.
And I would hope that the Water Issues Subcommittee would move a project forward one way or the other, whether
Without
they
doing
want
the
to recommend an approval or recommend a denial without continuing it on for a year.
You know, one of the issues that I saw right off the bat was the 1 year, because it seems like a lot of projects don't seem like they get, they're there in a year, so to speak. Is that not right?
So, Councilman Shishka, sometimes it can take several months for a project to go through the process. They have to be reviewed by staff first before they're agendized either to the Planning and Zoning Commission or the Water Issues Subcommittee. But generally, within 3 or 4 months, we would see something come onto an agenda for consideration, and that's the trigger, is that it be agendized for Water Issues Subcommittee within a year of them making application for the project.
Okay.
It doesn't preclude them from making a new application if for some reason their project gets delayed longer, and that does happen. There are some projects that take
Can we
longer.
say that in the policy?
It says in the last sentence, once an application expires, it would need to be resubmitted for consideration pursuant to the then current policy and budget.
Well,
So
but all
they
I'm
could-
saying is that couldn't we make it a little clearer? What you made clear was it just has to be agendized on the Water Issues Committee in order for it to be considered as submitted, so to speak. I mean, make it any clearer to the construction industry.
Is it fairer to say that the 1 year begins at the time of approval by the city or the administrative approval?
Okay.
So you get through
Sure.
the administrative process, you've got an approval, then you have a year.
Are you talking about approval, administrative or water issues subcommittee approval?
I think at that point it would have to be council approval,
Okay.
which we can rewrite that if that's
If
your
everybody's
direction,
comfortable
if
with
that's fairer for you.
Okay.
Policy 7, in the event that a property applying for water service has an existing entitlement to water from the city in a reservation contract or other historic agreement, that entitlement must be fully utilized before the city will consider approving additional water for the property. So this policy is not in the current code, although this circumstance did come up between 2019 and today. And this policy is reflective of the legal advice we were given by the city attorney, that they must fully utilize anything that there is already in reservation or contract before the city will consider giving them additional water for their property.
Without naming the specific project, if it's not the appropriate time to do so, can you give us a parallel example of how that might play out?
So, for example, if a residential subdivision had a maximum number of dwelling units in their contract, and they wanted to sell off a piece of their land to another local developer or contractor that would exceed that number so that they could build on a piece of the land that the original developer was not going to utilize, they could not come and ask for additional water until the original contract had been fully constructed. That would be an example.
Thank you.
And what?
Councilwoman Hall.
Thank you. So what? I mean, I guess why would we deny people the ability to even request water? Why would we say that you would have to go through it? So, for example, a lot when you're building a subdivision, when you're doing a commercial project, sometimes it's not cost benefit. It's not worth doing it unless you build X amount of units or you build X amount of projects. Why would we not say, let's see what the whole plan is? Let's see what the whole plan is. and then grant them that? I mean, it's just going to be, I guess I'm not understanding why. Why would
in
we
the
do
scenario that I gave you, that was the case. That particular developer had a maximum number of dwelling units that he could build within the boundary of his land. Over time, his master plan changed. It depends on the market drives what is sold or what can be built. And they ended up having a couple hundred acres of land that they were not going to build on that was included in the original master plan. They wanted to then sell that additional land off to another developer to develop with homes, but the land in its entirety was included in the original agreement. So most of those contracts say that they must fully utilize their water reservation before they can receive additional water. That one did not, but this policy would cover any contracts that do not say that.
Right. So that would be effective in what you're referring to if you're doing it retroactively, right? They've already built, they're trying to expand. But what about someone who's bringing a new project, whether it be commercial or residential?
This wouldn't apply to a new project. This would apply to a property that already has an existing entitlement to water through a contract or reservation.
Right. But if they're saying, okay, I'm allotted for X amount of water rights, but I'd like to expand, I'd like to make it more dense so I can make the housing more affordable, so I can make it worth the infrastructure that we have to pay to build here, but I will obviously need more water to do so. If they need that in their initial plan in order to develop, we're saying that you wouldn't be allowed to do that. Is that correct?
This policy is saying that they would have to fully utilize the existing entitlement first before they could ask for more water. That's correct.
And by fully utilize, we're saying you have to be done with construction before you can even ask for more.
It means they have to final plat. They must complete the final plat process, which then ties the water to the plat, the subdivision plat. That's how the water is ultimately tied to that land, is through the recording of the final plat.
Okay, but construction, logistically wise, they could request more, and then actually construct it.
The construction is irrelevant to the utilization of the water under contract. It's the recording of the plat that ties it.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
The way to look at it is, what is the benefit, or what are we trying to solve in this policy? And is it to assist with the budgeting process? If you have an existing agreement, you should utilize the water
Yeah,
has already been kind of given to you.
you should use what you have before you come to the well and ask for more. That I think is that kind of the point.
That's the gist of.
That's good, better, and different. I'm just kind of.
I mean, we had a situation where you had a pretty substantial development agreement in a particular area that went through a public review process, and the neighboring kind of neighborhoods, the neighboring developments were involved in that, so they had an expectation of what their neighbors would be looking like. I'm saying as far as the density and the development. And then the developer, after getting all these approvals, then decided, well, he needed to change the density and the number of dwelling units, carve out a big section that he said just wasn't reasonable to be developed. He got that approval and then sold that off to somebody else who came in and then wanted to add substantial numbers of new homes in that same area. That really changed the overall nature of that broader development. And then the neighbors that lived around that development were saying that they had no idea that they would have that degree of density and additional dwelling units, traffic, et cetera, in that area. So it was kind of a way of, I think, unfairly expanding the density and the development that really wasn't consistent with what was originally approved. And we wanted to make sure that that didn't necessarily happen in the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, but it seems like that's handled through planning and zoning, through city council. I don't know that I agree. I think there's going to be other scenarios where people are going to need additional water to proceed with a project. And if it is going lower density for more affordable housing, I understand that, but I don't know that that's amendment, I think that already is triggered. I think they would already have to go through planning and zoning in our commission. I don't know that the logic applies.
Happened though, like that didn't happen.
closing
so it's
a
not already
loophole.
the case. Like
Just
there's
closing
a real example of this not happening. It's not that it's a hypothetical. There's a
I'm not
situation.
saying it's a hypothetical, Brandon. I understand that this happened in the past, but what I'm saying is in the future, this could have other limitations that we aren't intending. To say that just because you have X amount of water, you can't even submit an application, that seems limiting to try to fit something for a retroactive problem for something that already happened. Why would you ever, you can turn down an application based on certain policy, but to say you can't even ask for more, that doesn't seem like a justified policy to implement.
So it would be a different owner, not the original owner.
It's the same property right, though.
It's a property right belonging to a new owner based upon a review and approval from a previous project. So all we're asking is that the original owner use up the water that they've been allocated before future consideration for an adjacent development within the original plan, but by a different owner or a different development plan. So it happens very, very rarely, but without some trigger to be able to have this reviewed, it would just be approved by almost a right situation. So now we're at policy 7. We've got how many more policies to review, and we've got less than 10 minutes to do it.
There are 24.
Well, obviously, we got a long way to go, and we've had a lot of spirited debate about this, which is why we're having a study session, which is wonderful. But as the chair of the Water Issues Subcommittee, we'll be meeting tomorrow, and I would like to propose that, we meet the first Tuesday of every month. So the first Tuesday in February, I think we should continue this and look at this again with the Water Issues Subcommittee, and maybe we can hash some details out too, and then bring it to council or bring it to another study session.
Well, I was hoping to be able to allow some public comment on this, but we've got less than 10 minutes now to.
Well, I'd like to
this and be
hear some
prepared.
public comment too, since they're here.
You could tell him.
Do we have any
Oh, no, they can't.
public comment applicants?
I have 2 cards. I do not have any hands up in the Zoom.
All right, well, let's see if we can get a couple of 3-minute comments. Go ahead, City Clerk. Can you call that?
Yvonne Dorman.
Mayor and council, this is it's always difficult for me to speak in front of a group, especially a group that may be in charge of my future. I live on Mullen Way. I lived in Phoenix for 30 years prior to moving to Prescott, which I did in '97. When my husband and I bought our property, it took me about 1 month to realize it was not a safe neighborhood in terms of fire. We have a well, and there are a number of homes in my neighborhood. So I approached the city as well as the county to find out how I could take care of this problem, not knowing a thing about politics or anything else. And I still don't know if it's appropriate for me to even be speaking before I hear the rest of this.
Yeah, what we're doing today is talking about general policy. However, if you
Right.
wait, we have an open call to the public, and you can address this at the 3:00 meeting in a few minutes.
At the voting session?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
Then
we'll
I'll-
do a couple proclamations and the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we get into the open call to the public, and you can fill out a little form for the clerk,
I
and
did.
then you can have your three minutes to
Thank you.
talk about this particular issue.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll see in a few minutes, Yvonne.
Howard Mechanic.
Mr. Mayor and Council, and Mr. Mayor, I appreciate your efforts to move this along, get this started, and there's a lot of good things in here. I just want to make one general comment, and then I wanted to deal with one specific item. The general comment is related to what I saw in there, that the city is working towards the goal of safe yield. I don't think the city ever decided that, and specifically what the city can't do that. Obviously, it has to work with the other parties in the AMA to reach safe yield. And so I believe that if the city wants to work towards safe yield, it needs to invite the other parties in the AMA to develop a plan to reach safe yield. Otherwise, I think it's confusing to the public, and I think the public will get misunderstands, because in the past, under previous administrations, it's been stated that we're working towards safe yield, where we're going away from safe yield, where the overdraft is increasing, where there is no effort to develop a plan to reach safe yield. I think that message should not go out, that we're working towards safe yield, unless we're working to develop a plan for safe yield. Now, the other issue I wanted to address was the issue regarding selling water outside the city limits, which we haven't gotten to yet, but and I know that what the intention is here, and I think it came up when there was sort of an ambush on the Stringfield Ranch project. But I think what's being presented is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The question is, what is the reason that it's a good idea not to consider a proposal, as Councilwoman Hall is talking about on a different issue? Why can't the council consider a proposal where there's a property that cannot annex, because there are state laws regarding who can annex and who can't? Let's say there's a project that wants to annex, cannot annex, but will provide very good benefits to the city of Prescott. What is the reasoning that you came and consider that application? Maybe the application would provide very good benefits under recreational benefits to the city. Maybe the developer would...
Please conclude.
Pardon me?
Please conclude your comments. And quite frankly, when we have a chance to get to the water outside city limits discussion, we could certainly entertain your comments at that time, but we haven't even gotten close to that.
Okay. That's fine. I'll come back to address that. I thought we would be able to comment on anything that was proposed here. But as far as what was discussed today, I'll come back and do you know when that will be?
I don't know. Our next session will probably be scheduled.
Well, we have we've got a pretty full study session calendar in the coming months, so I'll work with staff on
Yeah, we're going to try
on a
to bring
future
it back
agenda.
as soon as it's practical.
Other things may have to be pushed back, as to Sarah's point. I would hate to start this process, have months of lack of conversations, and then bring it back. I mean, this obviously, if council wants this
to be
take
ongoing, right?
All right, thank you.
And then Jerry Smith Fornara.
I wanted to just say quickly that Governor Bruce Babbitt and I wrote the majority of the 1980 bill that made the water management in the state of Arizona what it is today. And then we had AMAs founded. And none of you had just arrived, but you knew nothing about it at that time. Anyway, one thing that I'm thinking that we've got to do is bring everyone up to snuff on these things. And the one thing you need to know is Bruce was one of the top geologists in the United States before he became Attorney General and Governor and then head of the Department of Interior. So we've got to really think. And when people talk about Tucson, ever since I was 22 years old, has been the best at conserving water in the state of Arizona. Cave Creek is one of the best too. Flagstaff has to be because they have so little water and they are like Albuquerque. But I really think that we really need all of these. And Jessica, I think you ought to get with some of the people in some of the departments and be brought up to snuff on things, because you're bright as sin, but the questions that you ask are things that the different department heads can take care of. And I think that would help. But I just want you to know that there were probably 10,000 hours put into that 1980 bill. And then the 3 AMAs, we had the best AMA director up here of anybody in the Southwest. So, and when you're thinking about Phoenix in the next few years, because of the drought and everything, people will be leaving that area because there's not going to be any more water. It's like they're going to be leaving Vegas and other places. So anyway.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry Smith.
All right, I think that concludes the study session. We're just about ready to start the voting session, so maybe we can take a 5-minute bio break and reconvene at, let's say, 3:06. Okay, thank you.
Let's do it.